So welcome. My name is Pastor Irene. I'm the pastor of Kailua Christian Church, which is where we are today. So if you travel to Kailua or you're traveling via Zoom to Kailua, we appreciate you and appreciate having you. A little background on me is that I worked in refugee camps in Jordan, Turkey, and Syria for several years. And so I have a long-standing history with the Middle East. I lived there for 3 years straight, and then off and on since then, because I married a Palestinian while I was out in Jordan, and now I am forever going back to the Holy Land because that's where he's from. So I go to Israel, Palestine, which is the modern day name of the Holy Land, about once a year. And I understand that it is very far away from Hawaii. It takes us about 40 to 50 hours flying to get there with 2 little kids. So please pray for us every time we go. It is not an easy journey. So I figured I would bring the Holy Land to you guys since it's so hard to get there. Like I said, I brought some snacks that are biblical. They're from the Holy Land, hummus and lebanon bread and olives that are pressed from my mother-in-law's backyard that you are welcome to have to really get into the spirit of bringing the flight to you instead of having to go there. So this week we're discussing Solomon's Temple, which is really a huge context of the Bible. So a lot of the Old Testament has to do with the construction of Solomon's Temple, the importance of it, and then it getting destroyed and then destroyed again, and then Jesus rebuilding it within his own body. So a lot of the biblical narrative in general covers the temple, and I'll be showing footage today that I took of standing on the Temple Mount. Another interesting thing about the footage I took of the Temple Mount is Christians are not allowed up there anymore. As of 2004, it's Muslims only, because Ariel Sharon, who was the prime minister of Israel at the time, went up onto the Temple Mount, and the Palestinians saw that as a threat. And so they shut down all tourism for the Temple Mount, except for to Muslims, as a way of keeping themselves politically safe. Christians are allowed to go up into the gardens at 2 periods during the day for about half an hour of the day, but they're absolutely not allowed inside the structure called the Dome of the Rock, which is where the holiest of holies, the Ark of the Covenant, and the rock structure is built. However, I luckily, my husband is Muslim, and he is able to go into the Temple Mount structure. So I had never been up there before this summer, because I couldn't, it wasn't allowed. But he was able to get me in, so I put on an Islamic headscarf, which is fine. I've watched him do the prayer enough times that I know how to do it. And I respect his religion and understand that it gives him faith and glory, whereas believing that Jesus is the Son of God gives me faith and glory. Anyway, so he was able to get us in there, and it was really an amazing experience because Christians just aren't allowed up there. So I thank Hamza for being willing to take me up there, even though I'm technically not supposed to be in there. But don't worry, I only caused good trouble while we were in there. But that's part of the context of what we'll be talking about. And to that point, a lot of what you see in what's now modern day Israel, Palestine is very political. And that can't be separated from the historical context of the Holy Land. So a lot of what you'll see in this video footage is political in nature, and we'll be having some discussions on that. Although I just ask that you hold that lightly in care with the spiritual and historical aspects of what you're seeing. So the scripture readings that I chose, which are in the little handouts that I gave to you, and let's see, does anyone online need a handout? Okay. Lynn Garcia, there's someone online who doesn't have this program, but they said it's okay. So Lynn Garcia from the conference. So if you did not get the handout, then the readings, if you have a Bible, that we'll be talking about are 1 Kings 6, the entire chapter. That's the building Solomon's temple, which is in your program. And then further readings are also 1 Chronicles 21, verses 8 through 30. I can write this down in the chat. John chapter 2, 13 through 22. I thought I added one more in there. Where is it? And then I think it's the other one, 2 Chronicles. I didn't write it down in my own paperwork. 2 Chronicles. It's 1 to 7. Thank you. 3, 1 to 7. So I will go ahead and write that in the chat really quick. So it's 1 Kings 6, and then 2 Chronicles 3, 1 through 7. 17. And then 1 Chronicles 21, 8 through 30, and then John chapter 2, verses 13 through 22. So those are the Bible readings. So if you have a Bible in front of you, you could really just reasonably look at those readings, and that will show you what we're talking about. So a lot of these readings are very lengthy. So instead of reading through them, I will just give you the opportunity to do that on your own time, and I'm going to summarize them for you. So 1 Kings 6 is the primary one, and that is the building of Solomon's temple. So Solomon built this temple, and this 1 Kings 6, it describes how he built it. So let me go ahead and show you on the video what it probably looked like at the time. Oh, hold on, moving myself too fast. So before I get to that picture, this is a picture of Israel-Palestine. So I'll be showing this picture every week throughout this 8-week series, just so that you know where on the map we are. So today we were in Jerusalem, which is right here. I know my little pointer is small, but it's right here in the middle of the map. And we traveled there from my home in Amman, which is over here. If politics weren't involved, that would have been a 20-minute ride. It took us 8 hours because of politics, trying to get across the border. So we had to go all the way up here because of Hamza's Palestinian status, get stopped for 3 hours, and then come all the way down here. So yeah. Anyway, so that's a map of what you're looking at, but we're in Jerusalem today, which is right there, right smack in the middle of Jerusalem. All right. So this is one of the pictures of Solomon's temple that I have. I have several pictures of what it probably looked like, but 1 Kings 6 describes it, and pictures like this were derived from 1 Kings 6, in which he talks about how he built it and why he built it. You're going to see over here is where the Ark of the Covenant was held. Whoops, where's my pointer? So we can see. Right here, this is where the Ark of the Covenant was held, which is the tablets of stone that Moses brought down from the mountain after speaking with God. So they were held here, and we'll see the live video footage of where that was. And almost no one was allowed in here. This was a very, very holy place. Only the top high priests were allowed in here. Same thing with this. This was just an altar of incense, which was a walkway that went there. It's all described in 1 Kings 6. And then once you walked out of there, lower priests could be here. And this is where the sacrificial altar was in front of that. And then as you continue going down, more plebeian types of people are allowed here. So you'll also see these steps in the live video. Of course, this temple isn't here anymore, and I'll explain that. But for 1 Kings 6, this is just sort of a recreation of what that description is in 1 Kings 6 of how it was built, around the Ark of the Covenant being the center, and then the different levels of worship that they use to enshrine God's presence in that place. These little bases over on the side were likely meant for drainage, for coming down out through the altar. So it was drainage for sacrificial animals' blood to be washed away from the temple area. So the reason why Solomon built his temple is described in I think it's First Chronicles. Yes, First Chronicles 21, which I have like on page 3 or 4 of the document I gave you. And so King David, who is the father of Solomon, he was walking through Mount Moriah, which is where Solomon's temple was built. And basically what happened is that he got in trouble with God because he was trying to take a census. And God said, why are you trying to count my people? They're not your people. You're just trying to get control over them. They're my people. And so he came down, got really angry with David, threatened David to create an apocalypse of his choice. And instead, what he ended up doing was saying, I submit to you my mercy. Please tell me what you want me to do. And so God told him that, or an angel of God, it says, told him that he has to create a sacrificial altar. He said, where? And he said, on the threshing floor of, what was his name? Ornan, the threshing floor of Ornan. Threshing floor is where they would, chaff wheat in order to be useful. So the angel of the Lord said that you have to take Ornan's land and turn it into a sacrificial altar. And that is where Solomon's temple was eventually built. So David built a sacrificial altar there. He bought the land from Ornan in First Chronicles. And that is where the site of the temple is now. So the sacrificial altar was originally built by David on top of this farming area. And then Solomon ended up building the larger temple on that a generation later. And the building of the temple is again described in 1 Kings 6 and 2 Chronicles. There's a lot more biblical history on the temple. Because again, basically the entire Bible is about building this temple, the breaking down of this temple. Every time that temple was torn down and rebuilt, it was a major event in the Bible. So a lot of the Old Testament, Isaiah, Ezekiel, like most of the old prophets in the Old Testament, they talk about this period when the Babylonians took over the temple, tore it down, sent them to exile, and then they had to come back after they were freed by Cyrus the Great, rebuild the temple. And then when Jesus came, the temple was again torn down by the Romans, and it was never rebuilt again as a temple. And that's a lot of what the New Testament is about. So John chapter 2, which is the final reading that I added into our reading today, is about the fact that Jesus predicted that the temple would be torn down. Now, that really wasn't rocket science because, Jerusalem, for like a lot of its history, but in particular, the time that Jesus was alive was in huge turmoil because the Romans were very visibly threatening to take over and destroy Jerusalem. Everybody knew that. And so there's a lot of prophets like Jesus predicting the end of the temple and that would be torn down. But Jesus was the only one that predicted that the temple would be rebuilt inside of him, inside of his body, which is the only thing about Jesus's prophecy that actually makes it unique, is that Jesus said, no, this temple is never going to be rebuilt. Because all the other prophets say, yes, we're being punished by God, the temple's going to get torn down, and eventually God will give it back to us when he feels like it. And or when we repent, right? But Jesus said, no, this temple is never going to be rebuilt, and you have to learn a new way of life. I am the new temple. And so that description of Jesus saying, I'm the temple that's going to be rebuilt in 3 days is John chapter 2. They say, how can the temple be rebuilt? It took 46 years, in 3 days, it took 46 years last time. And last time referring to 586 BC. And he said, well, I am the temple, which is confusing to people because the biblical narrative about this temple is some antagonist tears it down, and then we repent to God, and then we rebuild it, and then some antagonist tears it down, and then we repent to God and rebuild it, and that's not what happened. The temple was never rebuilt after Jesus' time, and now it's a mosque. Like I said, only Muslims can go in there. And I can talk about the significance of why Christians and Muslims and Jewish people all find this temple holy. Right. The temple was originally Jewish. Jesus was a Jew. And then after all the Jews were cast into diaspora, which means that their community went elsewhere in the world because the Romans killed all of them. So they fled to Europe and they fled to Asia and they fled to Russia and they're all persecuted there, as we know from modern history. And so Christians didn't really value the Temple Mount in the same way because they saw the temple as the place of old times, of old Jewish religion. And they sort of thought to themselves that the Temple Mount, since Jesus is the temple, didn't need to be rebuilt. So, early Christians didn't think that the temple needed to be rebuilt at all, and that the temple was old news, it could be very garbage. So actually the early Christians used the Temple Mount as a garbage pile because they understood Jesus as the new temple. And that changed over time as Christians sort of came into their own understanding of themselves. They stopped using it as a garbage mount, and there's excavation history of old Byzantine, which is an early Christian model, and old Roman structures of pictures of Christ that are buried underneath it. But Christians never really used the Temple Mount in the same way that, of course, Jews did and didn't have the same attachment to it. Our attachment to the Temple Mount is its Jewish history, which is the predecessor of Christianity. And the fact that Jesus was up there a whole lot. You know, there's episodes in the Bible in which Jesus went up there to teach the rabbis, right? So he was probably, you know, down in the steppe area over here teaching rabbis about, and so we read about that. And of course, he went in there and started turning over all the tables of all the corrupt money changers. Jesus was probably up in the Temple Mount all the time. And so that's really the value of it for Christians, besides history. For Muslims, the reason why they built a mosque there is because well, first of all, Muslims think of themselves as the progression of Christianity and Judaism. So Christians think of ourselves as the progression of Judaism, the next chapter. Judaism is our history, Jesus is the new thing. Muslims think of Jesus and Judaism as the old thing and Muhammad the prophet as the new thing. And of course, we don't believe that as Christians, but that is what they believe. And that's just the difference in our religions. But we all believe that Abraham was the founding father of our religions. Yeah, so that's the reason why it's a mosque, is that they believe that Muhammad the prophet just ascended into heaven from the altar, the place where the Holy of Holies was. And so they built a mosque there because they think that's where Muhammad ascended into heaven. That's a lot of information. Before I move on with the video, does anyone have any questions so far? Anyone on Zoom? I feel like I just stated a lot of stuff. Okay. Well, if you think of anything, let me know. We'll have more time to talk later. So this is I didn't take this picture, but this is a model in Jerusalem of what the Temple Mount probably looked like during the time of Jesus. So as you see, so this is just a different angle of it. Let me see if I can find my pointer. Pointer, where are you? Anyone see it on their screen? There it is, I see him. Okay, so right here in the middle is where the holiest of holies would have been. So the direction that you're looking at it, I will show you a picture I took of the direction that you're looking at it. Is you're looking from the north and facing down. So this direction would have been taken from, this picture would have been taken from where the Mount of Olives is. Yeah. You can't see the cursor. I can't, it's because it's hooked up to the computer. I'm sorry, that is just a glitch. So what I'm talking about for people that are in the room is this structure right in the middle, right here. So the holiest of holies would have been right there. And then we're facing the direction of north. And I will show you all these things in the live video. I'm just trying to get you some orientation of what you're looking at. And then the old city of Jerusalem, which I have footage of walking through, it still looks almost exactly like that. Would have looked like this behind here. So these are places where Jesus would have walked. For people on Zoom, I'm talking about the smaller structures that's behind the larger structure. That's the old city of Jerusalem, which still looks exactly the same as that. And the direction we're looking at is from the Mount of Olives. Over here, the structure with the red roof, that's to the left side of the screen. Right here, that was Solomon's stables, which I also got video footage of. I went into it. And so that's where Solomon would have kept his stables. That's also probably where the marketplace was. So this was really more for, it was the marketplace. So the place where Jesus probably overturned the tables at the temple was this area over here. And this is also where women were allowed to stand. But the closer you got to this middle part, the more holy you had to be. Only the high priests were allowed in this area. And this right here is where the sacrificial altar would have been. And then so let me show people on Zoom. Right here is where the sacrificial altar would have been, if you could see the cursor. Right here, sacrificial altar. And then over here is the stables. Solomon's stables. So that's where Jesus would have overturned the money changers. And he probably, all the normal people who were coming up to the temple to bring sacrifices or buy sacrifices, that's basically what they bought and sold at the temple, was sacrificial animals. They probably would have all come in and out through this direction, because this is the least holy direction of the temple. And the type of sacrifices that people would have bought there depended on your social status and your ability to buy things. I think this is described in the Bible, but really poor people would have bought rice. Rice, yeah. And well, lambs, you would have had to be pretty rich, actually. So poor people would have bought rice. They would have bought grain. They would have bought birds. Pigeons, and then richer people would have bought lambs and goats and fatted calves, and of course, this sort of a interesting system. But all that would have happened at the red hut on the left side of the screen. Yeah. And you'll see the current version of this in just a moment, but the direction we're facing again is from the Mount of Olives, where Jesus delivered the Beatitudes. And when Jesus came into Jerusalem on his donkey, it's thought that he probably came through the gate that we're looking at right here, which is still standing, and I'll show it to you. The only original wall from the temple that Solomon built is on the far side, and I'll show you a picture of that too. So it would have been over here, right there, and I'll show you a picture of that. It's the only original wall. The rest of the walls that you see there on the temple are from the Crusader period. So they're probably built around 1100 AD. But the original one from Jesus's time is going to be around the other side. Because again, right after Jesus lived, the whole temple was destroyed. So there's only one remaining wall from that time period. Although the ground of the Temple Mount is also original from Solomon's time. So the ground and the wall back there are the only things that are from 4,000 years ago. So I took this picture. Here's the exact same structure, but from the current viewpoint. Oops, let me move this thing so that you guys don't have this thing in the middle. Now you probably can't see this on Zoom, but the people live can. So I'll just move it over here so it's less annoying. Okay, so you're looking at almost the exact same angle at the real life thing now as that model that I just showed you. So let me orient you, since this is a little bit more complicated than it looked in the model. So that gate that you were looking at, that I said Jesus rode through on this donkey, is right there. Right there, and let me show you on Zoom. So it's this right here, if you can see that gate. I got chat. Can you repeat the information about Muhammad? Yes, I will in just a moment. So this is the gate that Jesus rode through. It is permanently closed. So the Crusaders closed it because they don't want anyone else going through it until Jesus comes back to enact the resurrection of humankind. So the next person that's supposed to pass through that gate, according to Christians, is Jesus, and according to Muslims, is Jesus. According to Jews, is the Savior yet to come. But all three of the what's called the Abrahamic religions believe that the Savior of humankind will come through that gate at the end of the world, which is why it's sealed, because he's the only one that's allowed to go through there. So the information about Muhammad that you asked me to repeat is, so Muhammad was the prophet of Islam who brought Islam in Saudi Arabia in about 600 years after Jesus died. He ascended to heaven from what is now the Dome of the Rock, which is this gold structure here, and that's where the Ark of the Covenant was held. That's where the Temple Mount, like the holiest of holies, was back in the day. So it's believed that he was ascended to heaven right there. In Islam, which is a major difference from Christianity, they don't believe that any of the prophets, including Jesus was a prophet in Islam, they don't believe that any of them died, that all of them were taken into heaven by God without pain. And that, of course, is a major departure from what we believe about Jesus dying miserably. And something that my husband and I agree to disagree on and ask God about when we die. But so that's why they value it, is first of all, Muslims think that they're the continuation of history from Jews and Christians, and that's why it's important to them, and also that Muhammad ascended from the Dome of the Rock, or what at the time was the Temple Mount base. So from that last picture I showed you of the old model, where that big middle structure would have been, where the Ark of the Covenant was, is again what's this gold structure now. I go into that gold structure. Christians are not allowed in there anymore. No one is, except for Muslims. So that's where the Ark of the Covenant would have been held. And then over here, this was also a mosque over here, is where Solomon's stables would have been. Or the money changing place, this is where the market would have been, over here. And you can go in there. I did go in there, so I'll show you the footage of it. Let's see what else. And then the pools of Bethesda would have been over here, which is where Jesus healed the man at the well who was planning to put in the pool, right? And then the old city of Jerusalem is behind there. We'll talk more about this image in a couple of weeks when we get to the Mount of Olives, about this massive graveyard here. And over here is Gethsemane, where Jesus was arrested. And I'll talk more about all that stuff when we get to the Mount of Olives, because I feel like that's more information we can share one day. But there's a reason for this huge graveyard right here. And we'll talk more about Gethsemane, which unfortunately I wasn't able to get to on this trip. But next time I go, I'll give you guys footage of that because it's incredible. Huh? Where's the existing wall? You mean the one from way, way back in the day? Yeah, so the original wall that was there in Jesus' day, these were all Crusader built walls, right? The Crusaders built these walls. But the original one is going to be back here, and I'll show you pictures of it. Yeah, so the floor that's inside the Dome of the Rock is original from Solomon's Temple. And the wall back there is too. Everything else had to be rebuilt and rebuilt and rebuilt because of how many wars happened in Jerusalem. So for the people on Zoom, this is where the Ark of the Covenant was. And then this is where Solomon's stables were, or the marketplace where they bought and sold sacrificial stuff. Over here is Gethsemane. And I'll talk more about that on the week that we talk about Mount of Olives. And then back here, right here, is where the original retaining wall from Jesus' day and before would have been. And I have a picture of that I'll show you. Yes, it's called the Golden Gate. Someone asked what. So all the gates in Jerusalem have names. This one that we're looking at that Jesus is meant to walk through at the end of the world is called the Golden Gate. So this is just another viewpoint of the temple. So this, you're looking at it from the opposite side this time. This wall that's closest to us on the screen is the only original wall that's still standing. This is probably what it looks like during construction. Mount Moriah, which is in the middle, is where the Dome of the Rock is standing now and where the Holiest of Holies was for most of its history. Mount Moriah is important because of a lot of reasons. In the Bible, it's where Abraham nearly sacrificed Isaac. It's also thought of as the place where God created Adam from the dust, but there's no like biblical backup to that. It's just folklore. It's also, like I said, the place where the Prophet Muhammad ascended into heaven, but that's, you know, not our religion. But basically, its significance is David getting the message from God that this is the place where he needs to do his sacrifices. So Solomon built the temple there, and Abraham nearly sacrificed Isaac there. That's really the significance of Mount Moriah and why the temple was built right there. And of course, you see things like Herod's platform, Hasmonean platform extension. Herod, who was, you know, the king at the time of Jesus, he did a lot to extend the walls so that the temple is bigger. So you see all of that construction there. But this is looking at it from an opposite view, which I'll show you pictures of all this as well of what it looks like now. Any other questions before I move forward? We're almost to the video footage.
So Mount Moriah, where Abraham almost sacrificed Isaac, that's where it is.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like, because you know, we see pictures, and I don't know if this is, you see, it's kind of like on the top of a mountain. That's
Yeah, I mean, there was a small mountain there, but they built a really big temple on it, so you can't really see the mountain anymore. They built the temple around the mountain. So the temple goes down, like there's tunnels that go down into the base of the temple, like you see here. And I went into them. I'll show you videos of those. Because it, you know, in the Middle East, when they say mountain, it's not like Hawaii. You know, they didn't have volcanoes like whoosh, right? The mountain's like, so yeah. Right. Okay, any questions on Zoom? Okay. Yeah, he said that the temple will be rebuilt in my body. I can look at the exact language. I put it in here. He said, this is Jesus overturning the temples in the court. Jesus answered them, destroy this temple and I'll raise it again in 3 days. They replied, it has taken 46 years to build this temple and you're going to raise it in 3 days. But the temple he'd spoken about was his body. And after he was raised from the dead, his disciples recalled what he had said. They believed the scripture and the words that Jesus had spoken. This is the word of the Lord. So Jesus didn't say the temple is going to be rebuilt. He said, destroy it and I'll fix it. And the way he fixed it was through himself, which is why early Christians did not respect the Temple Mount. They just used the garbage pile. So this is the original wall from Jesus' time. Jesus probably saw this wall, probably hung out at this wall. This is the Jewish section of the old city. The city is split into 3 parts, really purposefully. There's a Christian section, which I'll show you when we get to Golgotha. That's where the Christian section is, where Golgotha is, which is behind us this way, if you're facing right here. And then this is the Jewish section, which has the original retaining wall. And then the Muslim section is that way. And access to the Temple Mount is that way. This bridge you're looking at up here, the bridge right here, is the only way that Christians or tourists are allowed up on the Temple Mount for limited periods of time. It looks janky like that on purpose because the Muslims and Palestinians do not want it there. Whereas Israel is the governing source of Israel, of the entire city and state, Palestinians have control of the Temple Mount, Muslims do. And it's just a really delicate situation. So they allow tourism up there because they feel like they have to, but they make it really difficult. And they do that on purpose is because the narrative in Palestine is that the temple was never a temple. The current narrative in Palestine is that it was always a mosque, and the Jews have no claim to it. Now, it's just a really complicated situation out there. My husband's Palestinian. I have a lot of love for Palestinians. But when I hear Palestinians say that this was never a temple, I always tell them that is absolutely not true. This was a temple for much longer than it was a mosque. That doesn't mean that I don't think that the Muslims have the right to be on the Temple Mount. They won it fair and square during the Crusades, and no point fighting about it anymore. But the erasure of history is to keep themselves safe so that they feel like they can retain ownership, because it's always such a delicate tipping point. So some Muslim authority several years ago said something really flippant about how all the Jews come crying on this wall and let them cry. It was never a temple, which is a really terrible thing to say, because it definitely was a temple. But the reason why Palestinians do that is because they feel unsafe in their own land, because it was forcibly overthrown in 1948 by Israel. So, yes, yeah. So it's just so complicated. But this is the Jewish part. I wasn't able to take a video because we were in danger. I was with Hamza, and we had just gotten down from the Temple Mount and walked around this way. And I was still wearing my Islamic headgear, and Hamza was wearing his Islamic stuff. And we walked in there, and people started yelling at us and throwing things at us. Someone grabbed our bag to search through it. So I just snapped a picture and ran. Yeah, it's like that. We should have been more thoughtful about changing our clothes before we went in there, but it was 115 degrees and we had 2 screaming children. We were tired. I forgot. So what you're looking at right here with all these folks wearing green is called a birthright trip. So Israel invites people of Jewish ancestry to come visit their homeland, which is a lovely idea, which I support. But the way that it's done is extremely political, in which they basically try to get all these teenagers together. This is just my opinion, right? But what it looks like when I witness these birthright trips is they bring a bunch of teenagers together in order to get them to marry each other and move to the Holy Land and take Palestinian homes. That's what happens. So this entire area before 1948 was full of Palestinian homes, and they cleared all of them out, took the land because of its significance to Jewish history. Which again is good and fine. It was just the way that it happened. If after World War II and all the Jews coming back from Europe wanted to come home to Israel, then there should have been some sort of really gentle, kind conversation. But instead, what they did was killed Palestinians and cleared them out of their homes. And that's why we have this conflict now, but it's all really complicated. We could talk more about it. Anyway, about the wall. So over here on the left side is the men's prayer area. So you see a lot of Hasidic Jews praying against the wall right there. And this right here, that's all men. The tiny one over here is the women's area. So I've been in there before when I did make the mistake of wearing Islamic prayer gear in there. You can walk in there even if you're not Jewish. And what a lot of people do is stick little notes in the walls, because it's believed that if you stick a prayer or a wish into that part of the retaining wall, that it will become granted because it's so holy. So yeah, this is one of the holiest areas to the Jewish faith because it's the only original part of their temple. And again, most of the Bible is about that temple. Yeah, does anyone have any questions about this image? Yeah. Jerusalem is contested area. It's in the very center. So the West Bank is where Bethlehem is, which is 2 weeks from now. So we went into the West Bank, but no, this is Israel proper. But Jerusalem as a city is not Israeli and it's not Palestinian. The west side of Jerusalem is Israeli only, and the east side of Jerusalem is Palestinian only. When we were there, we had an Israeli taxi driver bring us in, and we were staying in East Jerusalem because I'm married to a Palestinian, and he would not drive into East Jerusalem. It's too dangerous for him. So he dropped us off right in front of the Damascus Gate in the old city, and we had to walk a mile with our 2 kids under 15-degree heat into East Jerusalem just because the taxi driver was too scared to drive in there. Anyway, yeah. So if you ever go there to visit, you can go up through that bridge, but you have limited areas you're allowed to go and limited time to be up there. Where's my pointer? There we go. Okay, so I included some footage for funsies from a TV show called Chosen. Has anyone seen it? Yeah, no, it's like a historical review of Jesus's life. I think it's pretty good. It's probably a little inaccurate to context, but you know, it's an embellishment. But so in this segment from that TV show, it pictures Jesus having just come back down from the temple, and Mary's like, "Ah, where have you been?" But the imagery that they show in here probably looks a lot like Old Jerusalem and current Jerusalem, and what the temple probably looked like at the time. So I thought it'd be cool to just get a 3D look at it before I show you the actual footage. Well, I just want to check. Can everyone hear okay on Zoom? Thumbs up from anyone? You guys can hear it? Right. I am not getting any feedback from Zoom folks. I'm assuming you can hear it. Yes, that was an image of the Holy of Holies, what it looked like.
Maybe we should get going before they make the formal exchange. Jesus, please don't do that again. Yes, sir. You see.
Okay, stop. Sorry, the volume on that wasn't very good. I'll make sure the volume is higher next week, but mostly I don't have volume on these things, so we'll see. But yeah, that was just a recreation of Jesus getting lost, and he was at the temple teaching, and they're like, well, can you not do that next time? But I just thought it was really good imagery of what the temple probably looked like. So this footage I took, and what you're hearing in the background is the Islamic call to prayer, which happens 5 times a day in Jerusalem and all over the Middle East. It's meant to signal to Muslims that they're supposed to stop what they're doing and pray. I think it's really beautiful, and I'm walking through the Muslim section of the city at that point, so it's kind of cool to see. So I just recorded it for you. And this is just me walking probably almost the exact same street that we just saw, you know, fictional Jesus walking in that video with my family, who's very tired. Okay. Yes, that's me. But back when I had 2 front teeth. Anyway. So that again was just a random city or a random street in the old city. And now where you see me is on the Temple Mount. So I cut out my audio at the time I was talking to you, but I looked at the recording later and it was so hot, guys. And I had 2 screaming kids. I was like, I'm not making any sense. So I decided to just tell you in person, but you're going to see me talking, but I cut out my own audio. So yeah, so there's the Dome of the Rock right there, which again is where the holiest of holies was. The direction that you're facing is the Golden Gate. The Golden Gate is this way from where I'm standing. So behind me on the side, I'll walk over to it. So the Golden Gate faces Gethsemane and the Mount of Olives. But right now, what you see behind me, which I wish I would have gotten better footage, but I thought I was going to be talking to you at the time. There's Aisha right there behind me. Oh, yeah, right there. That behind Homs is Mount of Olives. Down there, ooh, stop. There's my daughter. But yeah, so again, this right here is probably about where the sacrificial altar was. This thing right here, that's probably where the sacrificial altar was back in the day. And then this right here is where the holiest of holies was, which I'll go into in the next part. And then I think the next thing I'm going to do is going to walk to my left, which goes down to where Solomon's stables were and the marketplace. So I'm going to pan that way in the footage, I think. Now, there's the Bethesda pools are that way. And then down there's the marketplace, or it was. Now it's a mosque. Yeah, and I will show you footage of down there as well, but it's not right at this moment. I'm explaining something about the fact that that's where the Ark of the Covenant was. Oh, I'm panning too fast, sorry, making everyone dizzy. It was really hot, guys. July. So, and as you guys remember, it was very, very hot in most of the world, including there. And look at what I'm wearing, you know, it was so hot. So, okay, so I'm walking over to where the Golden Gate is. If you continue down these stairs, the Golden Gate's down there, and that's Gethsemane right there. Yeah, so I snapped a good photo of it while I was there. I did not make it down there because I just didn't have the time. But I have been down there. It's probably one of my favorite parts of Jerusalem because it just feels really peaceful to be in the place where Jesus wept. So, yeah. Okay, this is inside the Dome of the Rock, which again is where the Holiest of Holies was. So I'm gonna I'm gonna show you in this video the rock where God made Adam, where it's right there, is in there, is that rock. But this is what the inside of that mosque looks like, which is just gorgeous. It's so pretty in there. And of course, there's Hamza and Aisha. That's some Arabic writing, just stating the importance and history of the mosque. Yeah, very ornate. I also got some still photos of it too. First, people just hang out in there because it's too hot outside. Just sit down, read. So there is the rock. That rock has been there since the beginning of recorded history. And it has not changed. They have purposely not changed it. Yeah. So you can also go under this rock, which we did. And the underside of the rock, which I didn't know about till I was in there, is called the Well of Souls. And it's believed that the Well of Souls is where people trapped in purgatory, their souls stay underneath that rock until God comes back to judge them. There is a prayer area down there. I didn't record down there because people were praying, but I did take pictures. But I just thought it was fascinating that there was an area underneath that rock that has some history to it too. And all over the place, all over this mosque and down inside on the walls, you see all these little crosses that the Crusaders like carved into the rock as graffiti. Like, Dad, I was here. It's just interesting. Every once in a while, you walk by and you see this little cross, and you know, it's like 1,000 years old that someone drew that. So right here on my right is where the Well of Souls is. And again, I turn off the recording when I go down in there, but you can see this archway right here is how you get down. Okay, so this is the Well of Souls. That is my husband praying down there. But that's the men's area over there, and this is the women's area. Judaism and Islam are quite a bit alike, in which there's a women's area to pray and a men's area. But like I said, I read some history on the Well of Souls, and it's believed that the souls of the damned who are awaiting judgment from Jesus are trapped inside there. And I don't know much else about the history of why this is here. I read elsewhere that, you know, this was a place of shelter for David and Solomon as they were building or trying to find the place, or Abraham, because it was a cave back in the day, right? It was a mountain, and this was probably a cave, and this is probably where some of our old biblical characters hung out and rested while they were building here. And there's my son, being hot and tired while my husband and daughter pray. I thought that was a funny picture. Huh? No. It was really cool. This was the coolest part of the mosque, you know, it was down underground. It was, yeah, there was people sitting all over the place, just sitting there. So it was the coolest part. But yeah, there's my daughter and son hiding in one of the crevices of the cave. I thought it was a pretty cool photo of them. Like this extremely holy place. So no, I'd say that interior part was about the size of this room. Yeah. And there's a good still photo of of the inside of the Dome of the Rock, in case my footage was too shaky. Beautiful. They're good. Muslims are pretty good building stuff. So are Christians. We have excellent, beautiful churches too. But this one, yeah. And then this is footage from the down area. So this area would have been where Solomon's stables were, looking at it from a different perspective, where money changers were, where the marketplace would have been. And so I'm just giving you a different perspective. And here's Hamza and Adam playing with a cat. As you see, there's a little kitty cat up there. There's lots of cats in the Middle East wandering around. But so where he's going right there, and the reason I'm showing you this picture is he's going down into the stairwells where the stables and the money changers and the entrances would have been to get onto the Temple Mount for plebeians like us. So this is the way that we would have gotten in there, and there's a mosque down there now. So here's that mosque, which is also really pretty, and was built over the area where that marketplace would have been. So I just took a picture of that one. Yeah. And then here's the underground. So Israel was really mad. The Jewish people were really mad when this part of the mosque was built. This was built in 1997. And the reason why it was built is because, well, they said they needed extended area, but it felt like a political slight because the Muslims and the Palestinians came in here and just bulldozed right through that area, probably breaking a lot of Jewish history. And they were sort of doing it on purpose. And they just dumped all that Jewish history in a dump site. And the Jewish people, the rabbis and stuff went in and tried picking out like pieces of their history And they said, well, it never was a temple. We can do whatever we want with it. And it was just kind of a political slight that this part was made. But originally, a long time ago, this would have been the way to get into the temple from for plebeians. But now it's a mosque, and that's the way it is. And it's pretty. So. Yeah, well, it wasn't a prayer time. When it's one of those 5 prayer times, these places are packed. So there's a picture of Aisha. That guy was yelling at her for playing. This is just another video of us walking through a different street in Jerusalem, just so you get more of that beautiful call to prayer and more of video footage of the streets. And then that's just a picture I took of the, yeah. And then, yeah, of course. So that is really all the video footage I have. I can go back to any parts that you guys wanted to see again. Is there a part that you needed to see again? Anyone on Zoom? Okay.
You said that there was that gate that the Christians say that the next Christians walk through Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And did you also say that the Muslims believe that the next
Yes.
Christians, why is that gate?
Hold on, I'm just gonna turn off recording so that the folks on Zoom are not staring at a blank screen. Okay, you should be able to see all of us now in the room. Let's see if I can change me to being the center. There we go. Okay. Whoa. Yeah, so Muslims believe that Jesus was a prophet, but that he was not the Son of God. They just believe he was a prophet in the order of prophets. They don't believe that Jesus died on the cross. They think he was replaced by a surrogate. I don't really know why that would be. I would not attempt to ask Hamza. He gets very squeamish about that stuff. He's like, I'm not Sheikh. He's Alaska. I'm not Sheikh. Yeah. Or is that weird that we can all like be staring at ourselves?
Was that all in one day only? One day.
No. We were there for 2 weeks. I mean, that was one day that I was at. Yeah, that I recorded that. Yeah. I'm trying to see if there's a way that I can make this less awkward so we're not staring at ourselves. I guess I can just turn the TV off. Ah, okay. Now we're not staring at ourselves. Yeah. I mean, that's the myth. Yeah. That rock is where Adam was created. Yeah, that's the myth. I mean, we scientifically know that human beings probably came from Africa, right? So it might not be exactly true, but yeah. I mean, that area of the world is the birthplace of civilization, so sort of. I wasn't there. It was what now? Yeah, exactly. They it's thought that that place was Eden. That's right. Yeah. So if you guys don't have any, well, hold on, check Zoom to see if there's any questions there. Safe to visit where? Yeah. I mean, it's safe for tourists, definitely. For Palestinians and Israelis, not so much. And I was with the Palestinians, so it was hard getting places to get to places. When we covered Bethlehem, I'll tell you more about that. Yeah, getting in and out of Bethlehem for Hamza he was stopped and harassed and had guns pointed at him, but we predicted all that happening, so it wasn't a surprise when it did. It was just sort of embarrassing for that to happen to him in front of his children. So we just gave them some iPads to look at so they didn't have to watch. So yeah, it was still worth going. That was the first time Hamza had ever been to the Holy Land despite being Palestinian. The final segment of this series that we're doing is going to be my father-in-law giving his testimony of having grown up in Israel, Palestine. He was 2 weeks old when Israel took the land in 1948. So he doesn't remember it, but he told us the story of what happened. And he grew up in Gaza, which when he was growing up was essentially a prison camp. Yeah, and then he ended up fleeing to Jordan eventually, and that's where he raised his family. And they could never go back to Israel, Palestine. Hamza is the first in his family to go back, and the only reason why is because he has an American passport. So, yeah. So that was his first time there, and it was a sacred moment for him. So if you guys, I mean, you're welcome to ask open questions, but I had some discussion questions, which are on like the second to last page that we could consider. I think an important one is, what does it spark in you, in your faith, in your heart, in your soul, in your minds, when you see places where Jesus, Abraham, Solomon, David, other characters from the Bible, where they walked and lived? And thoughts on this?
As far as when you walk.
Yeah.
I haven't been to the Holy Land, but I've seen a lot of pictures and videos, and just the thought about it, just not really exciting for me, because that's where Jesus walked, it's the place, and all the Bible, the New Testament, the Old and New Testament comes alive, because you're seeing it right there historically, because and for me personally, because of my personal relationship with Jesus, it's beautiful, exciting. Not this place again. So, and just the fact that it's living and true, the word of God, yesterday, today, and forevermore. Beyond description. It's, I was a social studies teacher in history, that's my major, so this one, when I would show the picture of the one, that's just the outside most layer. So it was really good that you showed that the inside.
Like I said, it was my privilege and happy to
So
share
that
it.
was beautiful, so it's purpose for you to know. So that's my impression. Some of my family members that were there, my brother just passed away.
After your loss.
Yes. And because I always was sitting in, and I was always showing Jerusalem, the police historical things. On Facebook, I just kind of reposted, It's beautiful. This is one of the most beautiful cities.
Yeah. It's lovely. Well, like I said, it's just really interesting walking past some random wall and it's like this little graffiti from the Crusaders from 1,000 years ago. Our graffiti was from teenagers that did that 2 days ago. So,
So actually, I was. Oh.
that's cool.
Because of their prayers.
Oh, thanks. Beautiful. Does anyone else have some thoughts on what it sparks in you to be able to see the places where these things happen? Yeah, Vernon.
It seems like it's not tension there because of the two religions. Jimmy Carter, I was looking at. They asked him, oh, before he dies, what some of his wishes, and it was say peace in the Middle East. What do you think that ever happened?
You know,
There's gonna be no perfect peace until Jesus comes back.
right, yeah, I think God can do all things.
You would think that because they all have the same history, that they wouldn't be so
You would think.
against, all of their, different differences. But
Well, honestly, it's not really so much about religion, it's about lands.
Yes.
Yeah, I
can you
mean,
talk about the history, like how the Jewish people were, like, I thought I read something about I don't know what it was, like some world organization giving or designating a piece of the designating land to the Jewish people. But I'm not sure what that.
yeah, so I think what you're talking about is, you guys remember that picture I showed you of what's called the Wailing Wall, or the Western Wall, the original wall? One of the reasons why that bridge is temporary is because there is a big pile of rocks on the other side of it that was meant to be David's holy city, where David lived, right next to the temple. And Israel was trying to designate that as a World Heritage Site. A lot of parts of Jerusalem are supposed to be designated like that, so that they could lay claim to it. And the Palestinians said, no, you can't lay claim to that. This is our land right here. And so they weren't able to designate anything because they're just fighting over it. So it's contested. It really is more about lands, because the Christians and the Muslims I talk to that are Palestinians, they're cool with each other, because they're both Palestinian. Yeah. Huh? Yeah. So I mean, Palestine was the land throughout most of history, and Israel was the people that occupied the land. There was a lot of different tribes that lived there, and Israel is just one of them. So
Historically, it goes way, way back during the time of Father Abraham and then Jacob, and then they were exiled in Egypt when Joseph was, remember in the story, the Bible, that he there for many years until God told Moses to take the Israelites from Egypt to go back to Canaan, to then the promised land in Canaan, so they have that. So way back in history, now you have Isaac, remember as this promised son, of Abraham and Sarah. And then remember what happened to Sarah's that now the maid or helper, the Hagar, and you have Ismail. So that's the tribe of Ismail became now the Edomites. And that's where the tribe where later on there is this, it's all from Father Abraham children, but then Isaac's descendants, when you bring that Isaac and Jacob, okay, Ismail. So because of that, later on, that's actually where the current Palestinian and the Israelites promised. But that's the conflict. We're all actually brothers, cousins. So including us Gentiles, because we're all what you call adopted children of the Father, God.
that's right. So yeah.
So that's where we were coming in. So it's all in here. So right now there's conflict, but when we think about that, we're all related. So, but that's what, the fighting is over. That's what happened. The descendants from generations to generations. Okay, so because of Ishmael, but they're all were blessed by God. The promise was from Jacob's. That was promised by the father, the covenant. Okay, Ishmael was blessed. So anyway, and then the land. The Israelites believe, okay, they're the chosen people of God that was promised, so okay, that's the land. And then the Palestinians, okay, descendants of that was the Canaanites in Canaan. Okay, no. So nothing really have changed, even here in Hawaii. Okay, the Hawaiians, and you don't want, no, they don't want it to be, they want to take for the lands. And that's the same thing, I think, when I think about their.
Well, it was just different tribes, you know, there was lots of smaller tribes because people didn't have cars, you know, it's not like they could travel long distances. So different parts of Israel, Palestine were different peoples, like the Samaritans lived in the north and the Judeans lived in the south and the Ammonites lived across the river. Well, so the Palestinians, like she was saying, are the descendants of the Canaanites, which was a people that's been on that land since the beginning of time. Yeah, so Muslims believe that they're the descendants of Ishmael, son of Hagar. Yeah, and they believe that Christians are the descendants of Isaac. So yeah, so they think that we're cousins. Yeah, Muslims actually historically have a lot of respect for Christians. They think of us as you know their grandparents. They're partying grandparents. Christians in the Middle East are thought of as the party animals of the three religions. So we're free. Jesus makes us free. Woo! Whereas the other ones are like, wrap up, pray 5 times a day, don't eat pork, which is fine. It's just a different way of life. But Christians are like, whatever. Sorry? Yeah, yeah. So yeah, so I mean, Christians care about the Temple Mount because they want it to stay in Palestinian control because most Christians in the Middle East are Palestinian. But you know, they don't. Christians aren't trying to like claim to it. It's really the Jews versus the Muslims at this point. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So that's how are we doing on time? Oh, I had a question on the chat. The question was, sorry, let me look at it again. So Hamza could come back to Israel, Palestine because he's with me. Are Palestinians allowed to travel freely, or is it just Palestinians who live in Jerusalem? No, Palestinians are definitely not allowed to travel freely. Yeah, Hamza was only allowed back in Israel, Palestine because he was with me. If he would have tried going by himself, he probably would have been arrested. Or have been more difficult for him. But his dad, his brothers and sisters are never allowed to go back. Not on any type of visa ever. And it's because, and he'll explain this to you in the last chapter of this, but when Hamza's dad was born, you know, in 1948, when what they call the Nakba happened, everyone just fled. You know, people armed with guns, machine guns, were like coming to their houses and saying, "Get out!" I'm like, well, where am I supposed to go? So Hamza's parents and grandparents got onto a boat to go to Lebanon, and that boat sank. Can you imagine having 7 kids and a baby, and the boat sinks, and you're in the middle of a war, and you have to get to your house? Hamza's poor grandmother. So they had a dinghy rescue them and take them back to shore, and the shore they took them to was Gaza. And so they just accidentally ended up in Gaza, Hamza's family did, which ended up being a prison camp, which fought back against the Israelis. So the Israelis said that anyone who fled to Gaza and was part of the resistance was forever banned from re-entering into Israel proper. But the West Bank Palestinians negotiated with the Israelis saying, can we stay here if we're under your rule? And they didn't fight back. So they were granted access to go to and from Israel. And that remains true. All of the Palestinians I know in Jordan or Palestine who were the descendants of their parents fled to the West Bank instead of Gaza, they're allowed to move back and forth with harassment, but they're still allowed to. The ones that fled to Gaza, like Hamza's family, never, even though Hamza wasn't even alive then. So yeah. Huh? Yeah, it is very sad. The whole thing's very sad, you know. I totally understand why the Jews wanted to flee Europe. That's totally reasonable given what happened, and they do have a historical claim to that land. But it was just poorly done by the UN, by the United States, by Britain, by France, by the Israelis, by the Palestinians. No one did it right. Now everyone's mad at each other. They might always be mad at each other. I don't know.
How would they have done it?
Huh?
How in your eyes would have they done it? Designating.
Well, so the
Because it seems like that land issue, like you mentioned, it's land. A lot of that, I mean, existed throughout history. If you look at Hawaiians, you know, why they, or the Native American Indians, you know, they feel the land was taken from them. So I think maybe the Palestinians, you said, were the natives. Maybe that's the biggest issue, that they felt that the land was taken away. The culture, other cultures. Because like in Hawaii, you know, the really of the land overthrow, you know, kings to overthrow.
Right.
Royalty, you know. I mean, today Hawaiians just don't, you know, can't swallow that. A real hardcore Hawaiian.
yeah, right. This is one thing that attracted Hamza to Hawaii was a shared common history of oppression and land grabbing. What happened is throughout the 1910s, when Britain, France, the United States were slowly taking over all of the Middle East, because the Ottoman Empire had recently fallen, just fell apart, and that was the Islamic Empire. So all the white people came in and started redesigning the Middle East, and so you know they were quietly trying to take over Palestine anyway. And then, of course, the Holocaust happened, and so these white colonists said, well, why don't you just go onto this land? We'll clear it out for you, because these aren't people, they're tribal animals. And so that was really where it didn't really go right, is that there was no, like, you know, if someone had come to the Palestinians and said, hey, this really bad thing happened to these people in Europe, would you consider helping us build more homes for them here? They're historically from here. Palestinians would have been like, yeah, of course, I'll help you. But that's not what they did. They came to their house with guns after years of negotiation without Palestinians at the table and said, this is our house now. So, yeah. Oh.
Did you take some pictures of on your map?
Yeah, I went up there. We're gonna do Mount of Olives, I think, in 4 weeks. I went up there and took video footage of up there. Yeah.
So I was there for the
Oh.
between the times.
Yeah, right.
And because I was classified as a minister, but also for the UCC at that time,
Mhm.
I was able to get to certain places, but just coming into the country, my camera, I had to pay a $3,000 deposit
Really?
back then.
Wow.
Because because they were afraid that I was gonna give it to the Palestinians. So, video camera.
Yeah.
So, but I did film a lot of things, but the Palestinians that I worked with, I gave them cameras. Back then it was an Instamatic, but they happened to get that because cameras there, no one was allowed to have cameras. Not like today, we have cell phones. So back then, we had the cartridges. You could put it in. So, camera was really, really good. But, yeah, so like what you're saying, the land issue. It's challenging.
Really, there's plenty of space. I mean,
Yeah.
it's,
But there was a time when really the Arabs and the Christians got along pretty
Yeah.
well.
right.
In fact, one of the classes I was teaching this week, the Arabs were the first ones with hospitals. Both the medical surgeon books were written by Arabs, and that was used before the Crusades. And they had free hospital for Jews and Christians.
Right. Yeah.
Free, yeah, you didn't have to pay when you went to the hospital. You had medical care and.
Great. Yeah, during the Ottoman Empire, Palestine was a pretty peaceful place among those three religions. So, yeah.
Different stages.
Yes.
The whole Jewish Arab stuff. To me, it's just like modern, it's a broken family. Dad is one woman, and goes to another woman. I know friends that have stepfathers, and they hate their stepfathers. That friend. The younger brother's all right with the stepfather, but both the parents died. Now the stepfather lives in their original house that they grew up in. And that was just because father died, mom, like I can imagine something like that. Dad lived with somebody else, and dad lived with somebody else. Both family was somewhere. And this met a sister. I said, who is this sister? She said, she's my sister. Because grappling with another lady. So it's all broken families. I was just thinking about land stuff. Modern day Lahaina. People want to come in and buy properties and get people that have been there for many, many years. The money is not land is left to be built and stuff like that. So someone with money can come in and take the land. So you understand how they had a different people before, but Palestinians, but I get what I say, they live there, like you said, they give someone, like Lahaina, they give people, they get together and talk about things first, instead of somebody coming in and saying, don't be taking over everything. Signals. Maybe like you said, if they had come in and talked to them, the Palestinians. It would have been more open to the Jews.
Right. Yeah, but no one asked the Palestinians' opinions with all the white people talking above them. But that's the way colonization happens, right? Everywhere. And yeah. Thank you.
And I did Hawaii. Something to me is something different because Queen Elizabeth, she was now she's the queen of the country. Someone came in and took over the country. Yes. I have my one hour and different stuff because that's Hawaiian. But I know Hawaiians that don't like Christians. And they equate Christianity as always as a white thing.
Because if you look at the history of a lot of the missionaries, they kind of almost stole land from Hawaii.
Oh, yeah,
in the
sure.
name of Christianity.
Yeah, the UCC is a rich thing because it stole so much land.
And I mean, even the Campbell State and things like that, you know, when they had the they started the land registry, the land park system. They said they're gonna register the land for these Hawaiians that they were looking over, and then they just registered the land in their own name, not in the kahuna or whoever, you know, was had that property designated from the king or whatever.
Yeah.
So they just got the land, I mean, taken away from them, you know, like. So I can see some of this being really, coming down to things that people cannot forget, they just, but to me, what's done is done, but I guess the main thing, teaching of Jesus was you love everybody in your enemies,
Yeah, exactly. That's what Jesus meant by, in my opinion, that's what he meant by, I'm the spiritual temple now,
Yes.
is that, he understood the repetitive history of that temple, of someone's gonna burn it down and say, this is mine, and then we come back, and then someone's gonna burn it down and say it's mine, and we come back. He said, enough of that. We're going to be a new human family that's united under me. And I think I think that's what Jesus meant by the spiritual temple. My father-in-law, not to spoil the video for the last segment of this, but he agrees with you. He said, what's done is done. I'm really never gonna see my home again. And and so I said, well, how do you think this will resolve? And he said, we need a Nelson Mandela to help. Keeps being American presidents that are coming in there to try to negotiate, and America's the colonizer. They're not like an uninterested third party. It needs to be someone organic from there that's willing to unite them, and that person just has not existed yet. So, but that was his opinion. But you'll be able to hear that from him eventually. If I can ever get him to come out here, it's a 50-hour flight. My father-in-law's like, please, no.
I appreciate what you shared. I never did the, I don't think it's real stuff in the Bible. It's almost like a little kid when you read a fairy tale, right? You just think it's just a story. It's just, there is a real place. There is Jesus. Just like if I read stories about the Hawaiian stories. And we have a palace with this queen. The queen was put in her own prison in her own house. That's the room she was in. And I know there's a place for these people that want to recreate issues that like never happened. And it's all lies. So I appreciate that. Seeing this.
Yeah, it makes me sad that modern day Palestinians feel that way about the Temple Mount because they're scared. Because I know that Muslims of 1,000 years ago would have had total mutual respect for the history of it. But that's just not the case anymore because they're scared. Yeah. So for places that Jesus walked, in a few weeks, I forget which week, I took videos of the Via Dolorosa, which is the path that Jesus walks with his cross towards Golgotha. So that'll be another interesting one. I didn't walk the whole path, that would take me a long time. It was hot. But I did take some short video footage of it on my way to Golgotha. I took the shortcut. Jesus went, wee, and I just went, I don't know why he didn't do that, but I guess he didn't really have a choice. So, yeah. Do you think so? I think that they're probably the same grid that they used to be.
The rocks and holes in the mountains,
Mhm.
and because it's spread very rocky. That's probably why. Terrain. That's probably why.
That could be. I'll look that up before I will look up that question about why Jesus took the long way around before we get to that, because I don't know. Because my understanding is the city grid is exactly the same as it was for the past 4,000 years. So the direction I took should have been the way that he went, but we'll see.
So it's got 2 ministers in here. How big was the cross? Since we're talking about how big was that cross that Jesus said? And how far did he walk? Since you thought he didn't walk the whole walk.
I don't know how heavy the cross was. They do a tourism thing where they give you a cross that was supposed to be about as heavy and make you walk it. I've never done that, but I got video footage of people doing it. I imagine it was unpleasant, but the walk for the direction he took was probably a little under a mile. For me to get from the Temple Mount where I was to, or my hotel, which is near the Temple Mount, to Golgotha, it was like maybe a quarter of that.
I can imagine, I don't think it only, I'm a 200 pound guy, used to lift weights. And if I had to carry something that heavy, it was a while. After I got picked it up, with cattle nine tails, with my back up part, much in the face of it, then expect us to carry this everything. Quite different.
Jesus carried the whole, somebody, Joseph, one of the believers of Jesus, helped him to carry it.
That's right. So one of the stations of the cross that I passed and took pictures and video of is where that happened, where Jesus fell down and Simon the Cyrene took it up for him. But we'll get to that. All right. Well, before we close out, does anyone have any final thoughts about the Temple Mount? I'm glad you're excited.
Something we've always read about in the Bible. Watching it over here just brought it to life. It's better than watching the children's scriptures on video.
Yeah.
So I just want to say, those are something that can come in person.
Well, thanks. I'm glad you got a lot out of it. And if anyone ever wants to join us for going there, I have to go there once a year. I actually know a really good tour that takes Israelis and Palestinians to give.
That's us.
Yeah, but I would get a free trip if I did that. But I could take our church if we wanted to go, but that is a long plane ride. Yeah, you're down? Oh, okay, let's go. Yeah, just not in July. It was too
How long is that flight?
It's between 40 and 50 hours. It's 3 turnovers from Hawaii. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we stopped in California, and then we stopped in DC, and then we stopped in Germany, and then we got there, you know.
Passes to why Jesus took that route. Do you think that he really had an option? Seemed like it could be a political thing to make him, visible to other people and in that stage.
That could have been, I don't know. These are things I have to research before we get to the Golgotha and Via Dolorosa. I don't know. I'll get back to you. Do you know any?
I bet that it's a long.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll discuss that. Yeah, Jenny. Did you have a question? No? Oh.
Amazed that the wall is still standing. Just curious if they have any procedures to ensure that. What are some safety or what do they do? Structure stays where.
Well, so the biggest threat to that wall is Palestinians, which is why they yelled and went through our bags and throw things at us when we were visibly, Muslim walking in. But they have an entire archaeological preservation society, the Jewish people do. And the little museum is right there. And you can walk in the museum and it'll tell you all about how they're preserving the structure and doing archaeological digs. So yeah, if we do go there, you can go through that museum and learn more about it. I have a question on Zoom from Pam saying, thank you. And would your tour include a visit to Petra in Jordan? Sure, you can go to Petra. I've been there before. Petra's cool. Petra is this huge relief wall where whoever did it some 10,000 years ago, carved this huge intricate city into the rocks, like huge intricate city into rocks. You ever seen Indiana Jones and I think it's Holy Grail? It's in there, but yeah, I've been to Petra. It's cool. That's a hike in there. If you wanted to go to Petra, you have to be prepared to walk. The only way to get through Petra is on foot, and that is more than 1 mile. That's at least 5. And it's hot. And if you do want to take a camel, they'll say, "Oh, it's free," and then you go on, "Oh, I need a tip. I need another tip. I need another tip." So, but we can go to Petra if you want. That's right, yeah. I took some video footage of Jordan. Next week, we're going to be doing Mount Nebo, where Moses died overlooking the Promised Land, which is actually video footage I took 3 years ago, but I'm happy to reshare it with the new audience. So that one's a really beautiful one. It's surprisingly a beautiful area of Jordan that overlooks Jerusalem. So we'll cover that next week. Okay, well, if there's no other questions or comments, go ahead and close us out in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us together today. Thank you for this thoughtful discussion and for opening our eyes to your wisdom and glory, to seeing the place where your son walked, to seeing the story that you developed so many years ago and how it continues to develop through us. Please guide us with your holy wisdom and your holy light so that we can continue that story faithfully as Christians in your son Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Okay. All right. Thanks everyone on Zoom. I'm going to go ahead and close this out now, but I'll see you guys next week at the same time. And you're welcome to email me or come in person. I can even reasonably pick you guys up if you need a ride. So thanks for coming.
So